Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Managing Director of GMF East, Mikhail Baranowski.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic to be with you all. Thank you for coming back from the break. I want to invite my panelists, Celeste Wallander, Assistant Secretary of Defense from DoD, and Alexandra Scheffer, Senior Vice President at GMF. Celeste. No. We'll do it differently, but we'll not have two Europeans facing an American.
That'll be nice for a change. That's good.
Although, as we know, there is more and more of an alignment between Poland and France, and we'll get to that. But we'll actually do this panel a little bit differently. So think of questions, but both Alexandra and I will moderate. We'll try to bounce ideas off of each other, not only toward Celeste, toward each other as well. So this morning we had Julie Smith, U.S. Ambassador to NATO, talk about the NATO summit. We want to go a step further, a step deeper, looking at priorities for the alliance, looking at the defense side, looking frankly also beyond the summit itself. The moment that the summit is taking place continues to be a critical moment for European security. You know, I'm coming to you from Warsaw, where we are pretty close to the front line. We see this time that hopefully U.S. Congress will deliver on support for Ukraine as critical moment for the front in the war between Russia and our Ukrainian friends and allies, and also a critical moment that, frankly, the front might be breached. So we might be coming to the NATO summit not only as an important moment in policymaking, but also an important moment in the war. So Celeste, let me first start with the question to you. Given the broad context of the summit, given that, of course, we are celebrating 75 years of the strongest alliance in human history, but in a moment when we are particularly vulnerable, what are the priorities for DC? What are the priorities for the Defense Department, for the summit, for in the end, for President Biden as a host of this upcoming summit?
Great. Thanks, Mikhail. Well, thanks, Alexandra. I can't wait to hear you argue with one another, although, like you said, we might be agreeing an awful lot. I think you note that we're going to be in Washington celebrating 75 years of the NATO alliance, the most successful alliance in history. But at DoD, while we are looking forward to celebrating 75 years of the alliance, we aren't just resting on those achievements. We are actually building on them to be ready for the security environment and the threats that we face in Europe and globally as well. So our main focus is four-part at DoD. First is the work that's been done since Madrid and since Vilnius by SACEUR and SHAPE in developing the new family of plans, actual substantial military plans. There's three core plans: North Europe and the North Atlantic, Central Europe and Southeast Europe, which are linked together by an integrative strategic plan and supported by 7 domain plans: air, land, sea, space, for the first time, space explicitly, cyber, special operations, and everyone will be really excited, all the NATO geeks in the room, reinforcement, an actual supporting domain plan on reinforcement. The idea is to make sure that we have the right plans to deal with the reality of a Russia that has shown itself to have every intention of fracturing European security, first with Ukraine, but Putin has been very, very clear that it doesn't stop with Ukraine. It is about European security. Ukraine is a piece of that. Hopefully, and I'll come to that, an integrated piece of that, but NATO has to take this seriously. While we are supporting Ukraine's right and ability to defend itself, we have to make sure that NATO can defend itself, and through having a credible defense, have a credible and effective deterrence. That's the first deliverable that DoD cares about and is working on. The second two are absolutely necessary to make that first one work. That is making sure that allies are meeting the defense investment pledge that was agreed upon at Vilnius, which is not merely an aspiration as it was with the Wales pledge, but is now a commitment that 2% of GDP to defense spending is the floor, not the ceiling, of every ally's commitment to the alliance, the resources necessary to be able to resource those new regional and multi-domain plans. The third is, and I can report on how well we're doing, but let me just lay these out first. The third is the defense production agreement. So it's great to spend money. It's great to spend 2% of GDP. It's great to meet the at least 20% of that going into capabilities, actual capabilities and modernization. But you've got to have a defense industrial base that can actually produce the weapons, the platforms, the high technology capability that NATO needs to resource those plans. So we at Vilnius developed a defense production agreement, and we are looking to be able to announce concrete achievements and plans for making sure that we're doing joint procurement. We are using all the facilities available in NATO to create the ability, for example, in the area of Patriot interceptors, to do joint contracts, to incentivize our defense industrial base, to invest in the capacity, to ramp up both the amount but also the speed with which NATO allies are able to get that procurement done in order to resource those new regional plans. And then the fourth priority, of course, is working with Ukraine to make sure that we are going to fulfill the pledge that was made in Bucharest, that Ukraine will be a member of NATO, to create what Secretary General Stoltenberg has called a bridge to Ukraine's membership in NATO. And again, I can get into some of the elements of that, but DoD has a strong piece in that, in working with Ukraine on defense institutions, on training, on continuing to work on Ukraine's not just immediate battlefield needs, but its future force. So all of those are really what the focus of DoD is to support President Biden's goals for the Washington summit.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Celeste. There are lots of NATO geeks in the room, so we'll go back to deterrence and defense, to the defense pledge, and the procurement aspect of the conversation as well. Let me jump to the other side of the Atlantic, back to Europe. Alexandra, looking to the summit, the priorities for Europeans, but also if you could bring the perspective from Paris that, frankly has been shifting. I want to say that Paris is becoming closer and closer to Warsaw, So tell us your views as we are entering this pre-summit sort of last moment.
I mean, the war in Ukraine is taking place on the European continent. So we cannot escape from stepping up from a defense capacities perspective, from a geopolitical perspective. And that be it within the EU framework and the NATO framework. And so I would say Europeans need to step up within these two frameworks. And so there's been a lot of debates on, duplication between the EU and NATO. I think the most important thing for Europeans is to recognize that this is both an EU and a NATO moment. In Paris, you have a lot of conversation. How do you strengthen European capabilities within the NATO alliance? So maybe the concept is not perfect, but we discussed this European pillar. How do we strengthen that so that we better share the burden within the alliance and become even more capable, able, and credible partners? And that debate, including in your country, Michal, in Poland, has been heightened in the context of the war in Ukraine, because also we're looking at the trajectory of US domestic politics, how NATO, Ukraine is becoming increasingly a political debate. You have that also as we are heading towards the EU elections as well. It's becoming highly politicized. And so the question is, how do we sustain military assistance to Ukraine in the short run and the longer run, at a time where Europeans look at the United States and say, well, the message we're getting is, yes, the United States will remain an important supporter of Ukraine, but maybe not to the extent, to the level that it has been these 2 past years and a half. And so that burden of Europe's security and defense relies on us Europeans first and foremost. So this is really, I would say, gaining a particular acuteness, especially in Paris.
It's great to hear, because this is the acuteness that, frankly, we have felt on the eastern flank of the alliance. We often think about that in the long term, we probably will be fine as the alliance. But to get to a long term, we have to get through the short term of this really coming months and coming years. So the question I would ask to both of you, but perhaps in a different way, starting with you, Alexandra, is, are we ready? Are we ready as Europeans to take on that role? Not that I would quote, this is the hour of Europe again, but are we ready to step up? And to you, Celeste, are we ready also in the context of the defense and deterrence? You mentioned the family of plans. Those plans have to be filled by capabilities. Are we ready there, as the threat is frankly coming closer also to our shores? But perhaps we can start, Alexandra, with you on the European bit.
My response is very simple. In the short run, no. We're definitely not ready, because the problem that Europe is facing today is that we are doing 2 things at the same time. We're catching up with chronic disinvestments in our defense capabilities and our defense industry, while we need to accelerate and sustain military assistance to Ukraine, and therefore build European defense capabilities and think about future capabilities. And so what do we do in that in-between phase we are in today? We need to buy American, because we don't have the available European defense capabilities. And yet we also need to invest in the future European defense industry. Because without having a European defense industry, we will not be a credible partner within the transatlantic relation and a credible partner to the United States. So this is what we're experiencing. It's inflection point. I think we all recognize that. And it's time to speed up. Brussels, we're sitting in Brussels, is a heavy machine, but we can and we have the capabilities to accelerate.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agree that we have to speed up, and also what you said about avoiding the trade-offs between being ready in the long term without undermining the capabilities that we need to get now, looking from the eastern flank. So Celeste, are we ready when it comes to defense and deterrence, filling up those plans? And frankly, if I can throw this in, it's a little bit of a moment right now, but are we going to be fast enough to help our Ukrainian brothers and sisters to defend on the line of contact?
I agree with Alexandra. We as an alliance are not there yet, but we are a lot closer to where we need to be, and we are on the right trajectory compared to where we were 2 years ago. By the time of the summit, there should be at least 20 NATO allies who meet that 2% of spending as a floor, not a ceiling. And the United States leads one of the NATO battle groups on the eastern flank, the one in a place you, I think, are familiar with, called Poland.
Just a little bit, yes.
Yeah, that one. But there are 7 other battle groups in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. Each of those is led by a European country.
Yeah.
And so the responsibility sharing, I don't like burden. NATO is not a burden. NATO is a responsibility, and a welcome responsibility, because it makes our citizens safe and contributes to global security. The responsibility sharing is happening. And we are working with NATO allies, for example, with Germany, with France, with Sweden, on providing a variety of capabilities to Ukraine that have been helping Ukraine to defend the front lines and the air and and even in the maritime domain as well, some pretty creative support from some countries in Europe. We're learning those lessons for that defense production. We are using the opportunity to innovate. We are learning from the Ukrainians technological innovation, especially in the area of UAVs, but also a lot of operational lessons learned in tactics. All of that is being incorporated into those regional plans, into that planning. And NATO allies across the board are stepping up in assigning, allocating the various levels of forces to SACEUR, and allies agreed at Vilnius to give SACEUR greater flexibility in deciding how to distribute and utilize forces that allies do put under NATO command. The United States, for our part, for the first time, has put all of U.S. forces under in Europe available for SACEUR in time of need, and a number of other NATO allies have moved in that direction as well. So we're not there yet, but we do have time because the assessments of when the Russians intend to be able to reconstitute and rebuild, again for NATO scenarios, counter-NATO scenarios, we have a couple of years, but we only have a couple of years. So we need to do the work now, not to have to fight Russia, but to have such a substantial, clear, multi-domain, all NATO defense capability that we are so credible in our defense that deterrence holds. On Ukraine, are we doing it fast enough? We've done it pretty fast. Over 2 years, we've done it largely from stocks because of the nature of the battles. But what we've begun to pivot to, or all of us began to pivot to 2 years ago, is to do longer term procurement. So at the same time that we have been providing Ukraine with stocks that were, in our readiness military closets. We already had begun to ramp up that defense production. The United States has been investing in expanding the ability of our defense industry, for example, to produce larger quantities and faster amounts of 155 millimeter ammunition that Ukraine is so desperately in need of. Most of the challenges Ukraine is facing right now in the battlefield isn't because we can't deliver what they need in the near term. It's been because of some constraints on the American side in getting the authorities and the appropriations. Once we get, hopefully, the supplemental pass tomorrow, we will be ready to deliver the capabilities again that we were delivering to Ukraine up until late 2023.
Fantastic. We are crossing our fingers for our colleagues in Congress to get this job done this weekend, so you can start shipping this capabilities as soon as possible. I want us to think beyond the summit now, and I want to also bring Alexandra with her thoughts and question from the recent meeting that GMF has held in Washington. But let me, going beyond the summit, one clear direction or the clear question is the place of Ukraine within the alliance, and the bridge to the alliance, as you mentioned. Perhaps we can start, Alexandra, with your quick take, because I see that our time is going really fast. The change of thinking on this in Paris, and then Celeste, if we could go to you, what this bridge will look like. But
no, from a French perspective, Ukraine's destiny is inevitably linked to Europe's destiny. That's for sure. And the more the war will go on, the more Ukraine will become part of Europe. But also, the French debate, you're right to mention that, on Ukraine's potential membership to NATO has truly shifted, because there's a recognition today that the best security guarantee for Ukraine is being part of NATO. Now, I know this is a debate among allies and partners. What I've been hearing in Washington, and we just held one of our seminars called the Transatlantic Security Task Force, and we're hearing more and more this unfortunate framing of Ukraine in the weeks or months to come, which is Ukraine is failing or might fail in the short run, and so let's not overcommit at the next NATO summit when it comes to a path or a bridge vis-à-vis Ukraine. And that is not only in the American debate, but you feel that in a lot of European capitals as well, who are becoming increasingly concerned. So I think this, from a public narrative perspective, doesn't really look good. I know that we are now having a consensus of how we can formulate this, but there is not an agreement among transatlantic allies today. So this is what I wanted to share, because I've been particularly struck in my conversations within that transatlantic seminar. We had, around 15 European countries represented and Americans as well, and this seemed like a very sticky aspect of the conversation.
Would you like to react to this assessment, to the question, how does the bridge look like? How do we find, on one hand, the unity but within the alliance, but on the other hand, we actually make credible, meaningful step forward?
So one of the wonderful aspects of the privilege of serving at DoD is that we really focus on practical realities and how to get there, not about sort of big picture questions. So for our part, what we are focused on is understanding what the standards for NATO membership, which have been established for each aspirant country over the past 30 years, and which successfully have been traversed and achieved by many countries who are now members of NATO. We can do this. Ukraine has already done a great deal of this. Ukraine, before the conflict, but during the conflict, has modernized its defense institutions. It has improved it, for example, its reporting to the United States on its use of the capabilities that we have been providing, even while fighting a war. We have seen clear movement towards professionalism in the Ukrainian military. The NATO allies agreed to create a joint analysis and training center to be able to bring the Ukrainian military and civilian defense officials in to work on NATO interoperability, not just military interoperability, which is happening per force on the ground, but actually planning, analysis, the kinds of processes that lead to regional plans, that lead to force allocations and contributions. So all the practicalities so that when a political debate among allies may be resolved, that on day one, Ukraine will be ready to be a NATO ally. And we take that at DoD as our responsibility. And that's the focus of what we expect to be able to celebrate and acknowledge at the Washington summit.
Fantastic. So you're creating a turnkey solution whenever the political level is ready. So we are almost out of time, and I wanted to bring at least one question from the audience. So if somebody... Great, sir. If you have access to the mic, there you go. And if you could be specific to a specific panelist and short, because we have 20 seconds to answer. Oh no. Then project will...
All right, I'll try again. There we go. Thank you very much, both of you. My name is Niklas Abt. I work for Microsoft. I was just curious whether you can talk a little bit about maybe the digital battlefield experiences in Ukraine and what kind of lessons learned you might be injecting into the summit, the sessions in July. Thank you.
Perfect. How about we do it as a question to you, Celeste? Lessons from Ukraine, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the most important lessons of Russia's invasion and war against Ukraine. But we're also seeing it globally. You see it not just in combat, but you're seeing it in the process of understanding intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance. We're seeing countermeasures, understanding countermeasures, both that complicate, for example, Ukraine's use of UAVs on the battlefield, but also Ukraine's innovations in developing their own counter-UAV technologies. And this, again, comes back to the point, which is that we're not, one of the reasons why I think Alexandra and I both agreed we're not quite there where NATO needs to be, is because there has been a lag in recognizing the advanced modernization across multi-domains that is required. And so with that, I can't get into specifics here, but the fact that explicitly space and cyber are two of the domains that will support those regional plans, those kind of traditional, think Cold War regional ground forces supporting by air forces, backed up by maritime forces. We're in a different world now where you have to integrate ground, air, maritime together in line with also space capabilities, space awareness, and cyber and technological battles. One of the things DoD does for allies and also for European partners is we have what Cybercom calls hunt forward teams, and those hunt forward teams helps allies and partners to make sure that they understand what's going on in their networks, in their technology, so they can provide for resilience and defense against assault, not just from Russia, but the nature of those assaults sometimes come from actors further away. So that very much is a very large aspect of those regional plans. Even though the term sounds a little traditional, it's actually very 21st century.
Super. Thank you very much. So we are learning from our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. We are getting them support. We are preparing for long term while we are getting more capable in the short term. And on top of this, we are doing all the fancy policy stuff that will be assessed and delivered on the NATO at the NATO summit in Washington. Thank you so much for joining me for joining us for this conversation. Please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists.
Thank you.
And off to the next discussion.